All right. Hey, Sean, welcome to our first podcast.
I'm so excited. This is awesome.
Thanks. Me too, man. And for the first people listening, this is our first episode of the DFI Podcast, where we go deep on infrastructure and services for Web3. And I'm excited to chat with you, man. It's going to be a weekly session about Web3 infrastructure, services, use cases, people driving the consumption for this stuff, and what we see changing in the news. So what do you think? Anything else I missed, Ishan?
No, I think that's perfect. Super excited to get started. Excited for the listeners to give us feedback on stuff they'd like to listen about too. So hopefully we'll be able to cover things that people are interested in.
Totally agree. All right. So maybe to kick it off first, I think you've picked a really excellent topic for the first one here, which is near and dear to our heart. So I'll let you kick us off.
Yeah, absolutely. So for the first topic, there's something that I care about deeply is the intersection of Web3 and AI. Worked in Web3 and worked in AI, so naturally I'm drawn to this topic. There's been a lot of interesting news recently in the AI space with LLMs, as everyone knows. But I just saw, and we were talking about this, that Solana has a ChatGPT plugin. So that's super cool. I think you can do. I checked it out. You can do I checked out the GitHub. You can do basic stuff. Buy tokens, buy NFTs, check account values. It's actually really cool. It's a little UI for being able to do stuff that I think you'd have to go look at like a Phil Fox kind of replicant to do those kinds of things, or like a wallet or a Coinbase. What are your thoughts on this ChatGPT plugin?
I think it's ChatGPT is so interesting right now. It's driving so much innovation, and there's a lot of talk in the space about using crypto economics to power those versus like what's AI going to look like from traditional centralized sources. And Solana has traditionally had a tremendous developer community. So if anybody's positioned to do well and get it going really quickly, it's Solana. The only question I have is, when you were looking at the demo, did you see anything unique about the Solana ecosystem that would have separated it from any other sort of using crypto and AI, or is it kind of a Me Too thing?
Yeah, I mean, I thought, I didn't see anything new, but I just thought like, hey, it's interesting that these, historically blockchain focused companies are building plugins for ChatGPT. Almost, and I don't want to say it's a gimmick, but it sounds like it's a cool way of, increasing engagement, getting the Solana name out there more, to more people. Almost seems like it's a strategy to acquire more people on the Solana network, and kind of show that, that you can build a great like a great plugin or a great UI to purchase some tokens or whatever it might be. So that's kind of my take on this. That oh yeah, you got
Is this the one?
The GitHub. Yeah, that's the one. I think they have a video if you scroll down a little bit, or some screenshots. Yeah, and then they have like a bunch of things you can do. I mean, the other thing is that they probably launched something pretty quickly to get something out and see if like people are interested in using it, and if it gains traction, if it's just going to be another ChatGPT plugin where lots of companies make them and not a lot of people use them. But
the interesting,
I think I saw somewhere where like ChatGPT was like the most used web app, like the fastest growing web app of all time or something like that, right? So like you can imagine a lot of people are interested in this.
No, you're absolutely right. And there's an aspect of AI which I'm curious to get your take on, which is saying like I'm going to have this AI act as an agent. Like there was Auto GPT was a really big movement where you say I'm going to program a couple different things and I want it to go automatically make a reservation for me, call someone, text message, write a program, deploy it, just whatever series of things. And so people are talking about if the AI agent is going to do things on my behalf, how does the AI agent interact with payments or ordering things? Does it need to have a credit card? Should it use something like this, like the Solana thing that you're sharing here, which is like maybe it invokes a transaction on the blockchain to pay for something? Do you think that that's going to unlock, like that payments mechanism is going to unlock something for these agents, or play out differently?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know the answer to it because I'm not convinced that, I mean, okay, so I think like on the Solana blockchain, like these agents could unlock stuff to transact, right? Like, say you are a developer or a company and you build something like, hey, I'm going to build this dApp on top of the Solana blockchain, but these AI agents are going to exist in the user experience, right? And so you're using these, Chat GPT like or plugins or agents to interact with the customer, and the user experience involves like posting something on the blockchain or or a transaction happening on any blockchain. It could be Solana blockchain or anything. So you could easily have these payment, the agent make these payments happen through the Solana blockchain. And the question is like, I think the biggest thing is like trust and privacy right now, right? Like,
Hmm.
are people going to create a second wallet that give these agents access to their wallets so that you never overextend or withdraw more money than you're looking to? So I think like, if I was a user of this and I'm interacting with this, that's what I would do, because like I'm scared with all these agents and, blockchain transactions mostly not being reversible, that like, something would go wrong. It would hallucinate. Anything can happen, right? And so that's kind of my take on these payment things. Credit cards are always safer because like you pay the credit card bill at the end of the month. It's really easy these days to go and be like, this was fraud, this is a mistake, I didn't do this, right? Like
Yeah.
until those kinds of systems are built in into like, L1 payment networks, I'm not sure people would be okay with like making their entire wallet open to like an AI agent. Um,
Yeah. Well, that's an interesting point. I mean, does that mean that these payments providers like Stripe and these people that enable things, for web in the past, make it easy for developers, is Stripe the best position to be the payments provider then for AI services as well? Or maybe the AI just gets my credit card and I give it a
yeah, I
limit.
don't. I mean, I think even with your credit card, like, oh, right, that's interesting. I don't know. That's a great question. I mean, personally, I would like to see payments evolve a little bit. I know we're moving off like the Web3 infra a little bit, and we can come back to it. But I think blockchain payments are really interesting because if you look at what's happening in like India and China and Southeast Asia, right, digital payments are a lot more advanced than they are in the US, right? We're still using these cards. Merchants pay 3 to 4% depending on the card, credit card. In China, you've got WePay, you've got AliChat Pay or Alipay. In India, you got UPI, which is a government protocol, and
Hmm.
you've got Paytm, and all these countries, payments are like zero. The merchants are paying like 0.5% transaction fees or something like that, right? Like it's crazy how cheap it is, in a lot of these countries with mobile payments and everything. So I think blockchain and blockchain payments are one place where like the West can, dismantle the current payment system, which is, I would say, not great, but still have these reward systems. I mean, at the end of the day, merchants don't want to accept credit cards, but they do because consumers love them. And consumers love them because we get all these points back, right? Like,
Yep.
I have this like entire system on my credit cards of like which credit card I use to where, so I maximize my points in a certain way so that I can use these points to, do stuff in my life. And so like until that kind of situation is figured out, I think you'll still see credit cards, which is a big blocker to, blockchain payments. And if somebody built a great user experience around Web3 payments, I think it could really pick up. Um, but coming back to the AI thing, right? Like how AI intersects with Web3, I think it's just not agents and like the user experience, but there's like a whole bunch of stuff, right? There's stuff in decentralized machine learning training. Like right now, cloud providers are the only places where you can really train models, or like you have to have your on-prem data center, or like you're a hacker or whatever and you're using your machine's GPU, or you're a student and you're using your university cluster's GPU.
Hmm.
You've got that system, right? There's running. machine learning models for inference. So like when you're running these models in production, right, you can imagine Netflix as an example of Netflix is recommending you what to watch, right? That, I mean, at the end of the day, that's a machine learning model somewhere running a prediction on what you like based on, you know, a whole bunch of inputs into the model. How do you run that on a decentralized network? What are the implications of privacy, of security, of, you know, performance? That's super important, right?
Yep.
How if you train your model on a decentralized network and then deploy it on a centralized computing platform, does the way it work change? Um, you know, I think there's a whole bunch of
Yeah.
interesting stuff that we can go into here. And then finally, um, what happens like the centralized cloud providers have like X amount of GPUs that you can train on at Y price, right? What if you don't want to train on those GPUs? What do you do, right? I think there are a lot of interesting questions in this, like decentralized machine learning space, decentralized compute network space, also that are going to be super interesting. I'm interested to see how it's going to play out over the next like 5 years, right? Will people start training models on decentralized compute networks, or will the big cloud providers, uh, you know, continue to like grow their market share, and will on-prem or local machines for computation take off, or is that something that's going to also spiral downward as it has over the last 2 decades? So I think some of these things are interesting topics. What are your thoughts on these, Wes?
So many things. I mean, it's funny about like the whole decentralization movement. A lot of it has to do with giving ownership back to the user of both their data and also like the benefits of their data. And so to your point, your data in this case and for ML training needs to be shared among other people externally in order to be trained. So that is, I think, a fascinating core issue with it. I see some folks. There's a couple different solutions. There's like the zero knowledge approach, which is like they don't necessarily have to have access to proving to running your data in a shared system. It could be they could have access to data privately, and then they could show you a proof that they ran the data set right. There's also this thing where they would encrypt the data and then send the encryption key to you so that you could perform the compute over it without actually unencrypting the data. You couldn't see the raw data. And then there's like fully homomorphic encryption. All of these solutions are making a lot of progress. Like technically, there's a lot of engineering and VC money going into the space, but it really hasn't been solved yet. So then you're almost left with, can I make interesting insights from ML on open data sets or data sets that I'm okay with sharing portions of? And so that problem space gets a little bit more nuanced. I've seen some companies that are talking about like federated data sets where they'll share versions of the data amongst like groups of organizations in sort of a semi-trusted way, which makes more sense, and you don't have to worry about like the encryption of it and all that. But I still think there's some big technical issues to be solved there.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I'm a big believer that decentralized compute networks to train anything, I mean, decentralized compute networks in general, are going to come and they provide a lot of value. You know, there are definitely some advantages. Like you have more options on how to use your compute, right? Like you have more CPU options, you have more GPU options. Um, you're not locked, you don't have vendor lock-in, right? Like it's anti-censorship. Right now it's like, I mean, one thing that I'm not a big fan of is all these big tech companies are going to Congress and being like, please regulate us. And I don't believe
Yes.
that it's because they care about like AI safety and all of these things. I think it's because like they're like, oh, like with every regulation that's ever existed, it helps the big companies, right? Like, I think I saw somewhere that someone trained a LLM on, was it Mosaic ML or something like that? I think they have a open source LLM that's almost as good as GPT-4 or better than GPT-4 in some cases. I think I saw something on Twitter this morning where like somebody has built an open source LLM from the UAE that's better than GPT-4. Now, again, all these are, you know, unverified, so I need to look into them. But I think this is going to happen where like people are going to build open source models that are better than, you know, what OpenAI and Google and can offer. And like it makes sense for the big companies to be like, hey, let's regulate us
Yes.
before startups disrupt us, right?
Yes.
One of the
Yes. Yes.
reasons
Yes.
why I'm super excited about the decentralized machine learning network is, you could imagine Google being like, well, you can't use these many compute resources to train LLMs because it affects our business, or Microsoft or whatever,
Yes.
right? So, um,
Yes. No, it's funny you
so
mentioned that. But to your point, if you have black market AI and black market machine learning training, it's not fully approved and it's happening on the side. Does that mean that a hyperscaler has to push back and they have to run, algorithms to detect if it's happening on their network and try to shut people down for doing it?
yeah, absolutely. So I think all these things are really interesting. I do think that for, I think in general, this is true for Web3 and decentralized compute as well, specifically. But like for decentralized compute, it really, there has to be some good use cases, but really it has to be um, more flexible in the approach. So let's just talk about like
Yeah.
AI training, right? It has to be more flexible in terms of like how you can train models, when you can train models, where you can train models, um, but it has to be cheaper, and the privacy has to be there, right? Like if I'm a company, uh, I for let's just talk about like the enterprise business use case, right, for a sec. Like if
Hmm.
I'm a company, I don't want to. I know mostly that Google is not in the business of like stealing my model weights or my pre-trained model or whatever, right? Like so you don't. But and if something happens, you can sue them in like the U.S. court of, and that's like a really big. Maybe people don't realize this, but that's like a really big thing that people really like about centralized cloud providers. Like every tech person I talk to outside of Web3, they're like, can you imagine what kind of world we have to be in for like Google and AWS and Amazon to lose like market share and you not trust them, right? So many Fortune 500
Yeah.
companies trust them. Everyone trusts them
Yeah.
generally, right? For you not to trust them. And we've like moved to the world where it's like, because of, let's say, laws and the legal system and the court system, if something goes wrong, you can sue them, and it might not work in your favor. They've got big lawyers, etc. But at the end of the day, if they've done something horribly wrong, they will be punished for it, right?
Yes.
So how do you deal with these kinds of things in decentralized networks, right? How do you make sure your data is safe? How do you make sure your model weights don't get exposed and are not being able to read by someone who's running a data center or offering their compute services? How do you make sure that there is some trust that like the model that you're running on some cluster with some GPU on in GCP or AWS is running that model, is running that GPU. You have that, if you've paid for that entire machine, you're using the entire machine, right? How do you make sure that exists in Web3? I think all of these things need to be addressed for, enterprise and small business use case to move to decentralized web. Um,
I think you're totally right. And it's interesting thinking about, like, to your point about the premium that the Googles and the Amazons have in terms of trust. And then, if you look at a network like Ethereum or Bitcoin, you have this trust in a decentralized network that, because the math and the protocol is going to ensure that my transaction is going to go through, I can trust the math. But if you could take all the benefits or any of the benefits of those hyperscalers and their functionality, and you could provide those same similar functionalities in a decentralized network, and you could say, I'm going to run a website or I'm going to train an ML model, and you could verify that trust mathematically in some sense. That seems like a massive
mhm.
opportunity. I think that really gets at the heart of like what this whole thing is about.
Yeah, 100% agree. Like cryptographically verifying that the output of the computation is right, the model ran correctly, the GPU that I paid for was used, right? Someone can figure out answers to all these problems. I think decentralized compute will maybe not overtake, will be a big chunk of the entire compute market size. So I think that there's something really interesting there. Um, and yeah, I think, you know, just like I think this whole like privacy security thing is like a big thing, right? Like in the open source space, in the academia space, you can get away with running, or like say you're a Web3 builder, you can get away with running, your data on uh, open compute platforms. But until these problems are solved, it'll always be like a niche use case.
That's true. That's true. No, it's interesting. Like some of the players that have been in the space for a long time, like Ocean Protocol and those folks, like they have been working on this data privacy with decentralization thing for a long time. Like the whole premise of it is I go to Ocean Market and I pay X amount of crypto for access to this data. And they actually had a compute, they call it compute to data, which was their framework for running compute workloads over private data sets. But interestingly, in that scenario, the premise was we effectively can't guarantee privacy of the data. So what you can do is you could just ship us your compute workload, whatever it is, and run it where the data lives. And that was kind of the way of thinking at the time. But hopefully there'll be some new tech along the way that opens up some new solutions.
Yeah, I hope so. I think like this whole IP thing will be the main blocker. Cost and IP, right? Though I do believe that decentralized compute networks should be able to lower the cost of running, any sort of cloud workflows. Mainly because like if you look at the margins of these cloud computing businesses, right? Like I
Mm-hmm.
think AWS is like has the highest profit margin of any business that Amazon runs. And if that's true for Amazon, it's probably true for Google, maybe not true for Microsoft. I'm not sure about that, but it's still pretty high, right? So we're talking about pretty high profit margins that, can be distributed among people who, run nodes, validate outputs, etc., in a decentralized network. So I definitely think there's a space here for like lower costs. And if you get lower costs, better privacy, I think that's a good user experience that plugs in well with like, hey, I'm a developer, I'm using PyTorch or TensorFlow or whatever, right? And plugs well into that. You have a great great use case there, or a great reason of why people would want to switch. The other thing people actually don't talk about here is it's not about the tech, but it's actually also about distribution.
Hmm.
Um, right? So like you see when Ethereum and Bitcoin came up, like all these miners, they started mining, right? And they've started mining because it's profitable, but it's like this feedback loop where like people mine and because the price is going up, the price goes up, so it gets people interested into the space, and like this crypto boom happened, and it's like the cycle, right? I think
Mm-hmm.
with distribution, it's similarly where like you need to create a group of people, maybe something like Filecoin has done with storage providers, but somewhat similar in a compute where people bring their compute resources, and those compute
Yeah.
resources, I'm talking about like professional or high-end compute resources. I'm not talking about like, hey, I plug in my laptop into the network and like it can run some model, right? Though these
Yep.
laptops are getting super powerful too, right? Like my
Yep.
MacBook Pro's GPU, I'm sure could probably run some ML model for some price. Um, but I'm talking about, people who are running mini data centers and bringing, creating that group and getting distribution and creating that community is not easy. So it's not just solving like the tech problem. It's like you have to solve the tech problem and the supply resources. And these people who have these data centers or machines or hardware that want to supply to the network, you have to give them an incentive, right? Like, so like you have this like it's a marketplace, right? Like you have to create supply, you have to get people interested, so there's demand for that supply, and if there's no supply, there will be no demand. But if there's no demand, then people will leave the network really quickly. So you have to like figure out how to balance this and make sure there's both demand and supply. And the people who are doing the work or the people who are providing the compute resources to the network are able to profit or make a profit that
No,
allows them to like invest in more.
it's a good point you bring up, and it's funny because when we were talking about like decentralized AI, at first I was thinking about the challenge where most ML modeling is done within a single data center. The GPUs and systems are very close together, so they can share intermediate results and all that very quickly. Um, and then a lot of people would say, "Oh, we'll just use like people have gaming PCs at their home, and if you distribute it out to their homes, things like that, it's very widely dispersed. But then you need new algorithms, you need new frameworks. But to your point, if you could use folks that are semi-professional data center operators like Filecoin Network and other kind of similar like Ethereum validators and folks like that that have the infrastructure in place to run 10, 20, 50 GPUs, then you don't have to change the libraries and the technology. You can just run it directly, and there might be some benefits there of scale.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. Um,
Hmm.
I think conceptually the idea that anyone can plug in their compute resources to the network and start like offering compute resources for money is amazing, ideologically, but I don't know if it's practical today. And like you need to have some way of like verifying that they're, not bad actors and they'll stay on the network, and, they won't unplug their computer from the network and it won't die and they have a stable internet connection, all of this, which is why I think it makes more sense of like building a community of, people who, these, semi-professional or professional mini data centers.
I love it. Nope, that's a smart way to go. The economics are partly there in place. It's almost like instead of being the service provider, almost like coordinate the infrastructure and then let people bring their own, services on top of it, or their language platforms.
I think the last thing I just wanted to touch on is, and I think we touched on this a little bit earlier. I'm actually super excited for this space for multiple reasons, but I think like from like a short-term perspective, I really hope that, people can, a lot of people can, build their own foundational models or large language models, and we can see this happen on decentralized compute networks that are and open source models, so that we can see the improvements in these models over time, and maybe it helps regulatory bodies down in the future. Like I don't think we should be trusting companies with closed models to be deciding on regulation. I do think regulation is important and is necessary, but like we should see what these open source models can do. And I think part of this is, I think the US government should be excited about like crypto because of the, like crypto and Web3, because of the cryptographic ways of we can prove things that, that you previously had to trust us, like I'm X company, trust us that we're doing the right thing, instead of, here's an open blockchain network and you can verify that we're doing the right thing. So I'm excited to see how that plays out.
No, it's a good comment, and it's funny because it really shifts the power. I mean, like in a traditional corporate sense, the government can come in and say, we need to override this for national security purposes. You're going to do X and Y. But in a decentralized context, the power is more on the people and the operators of the system. So it definitely changes the dynamics in some sense. But hopefully, there's a balance in terms of the hybrid. Regulated and safe. Let's jump into the next topic. I'm going to share a article here. This one is from a16z. This is from a person named Miles Jennings, who I think is their head of policy at a16z Crypto. This group at a16z is sort of an offshoot research and investment arm, and they do a lot of really good content. They also do a lot of lobbying for Congress around crypto issues. And I think, Ishan, one of the things that you brought up earlier was people asking the question, why would I do anything in the decentralized web when the centralized web is effectively just fine on its own? But the thing I like about this article is it gets into really making the case for why decentralization, and then also how to measure good quality decentralization. A couple of the topics they talk about are giving ownership back to the user, and how that ownership component, giving it back to the user, is the big paradigm shift for Web3 protocols. They get into some criteria here, which is like it needs to be credibly neutral. It can't just be one VC that's running a show. It needs to be a group of folks. It needs to be distributed across a number of different geographies and different clients as much as possible. And the last here is that it's what they call stakeholder capitalism, so that my interests are to serve the community rather than just to serve myself. And I thought it was just a good set of criteria here to kind of think about how to measure the decentralization of these technologies. And the last thing I'll share here before I turn it over to you is there's a really good PDF linked in this article. I'll try to pull it up real quick and share this tab with you. It's just a good like matrix breakdown of the different factors of decentralization. Things like who's creating the blocks, who's running the nodes in a network, what is the software client they're using to access those things, who's building, who are the developers that are building it, is it all one company of developers, is it an open community of unrelated people that are building it. So I thought it was just a good kind of thorough explanation of why decentralization, because it needs to be said again, especially like after the era of Sam Bankman-Fried and FTX and all the failures of Web3. I know that in past bear markets, I always had this kind of like serious questioning of like, is this Web3 thing real? Is this crypto thing just going to fade out? Was it all hype? And so it's good to see some smart people putting thought into it. But what do you think about the whole characterization?
Yeah, I loved it. I would love if they just turned this into the PDF into a website or like a
Hmm.
Google Sheet template or something like that, so someone could do their own thing. I mean, of course, I could do the work myself. It wouldn't be that difficult. But I thought it was really well written, actually. It went through what economic decentralization is, what technical decentralization is, what legal decentralization is, and my favorite thing in this article was it's not is it decentralized or not, but what is the scale at which it is decentralized? And you can make your own judgment call on what scale should things be decentralized, right? I mean, I also technology is hard because it's so different from like software is hard because it's so different from like how we've lived as humans for so long. But like if you've noticed, like the world has over time centralized, right? And now technology, we're in Web3 and we're like, let's decentralize technology. And like technical decentralization, sounds really good, but if you have technical decentralization, you need economic decentralization. You need a little bit of legal decentralization, but how far decentralized becomes too bad, where like every single person, or a lot of people have to be running their own node for like every single software, software experience, or you're validating everything, right? Like, I think, yeah, I really liked it. It just always brings up like this question of like, we as humans, we live in this everyday society. There's like all this trust built in that, I go to a restaurant and they won't serve me food that has been poisoned, or, like, I interact with Stripe or something, and they won't steal my payments, and use that for something, right? I understand that like they have my data. If I use Instagram, I understand that they track me, but I expect that they won't like share my information, with like, I don't know, dark web companies or bad companies that are doing illegal things, right? So there's some trust built into like how we live our lives, right? We trust that the government will do certain things for us. Um, and vice versa. So it sometimes it's hard for me to conceptually be like, yes, fully decentralization is a good thing, but I do believe in a lot of technical and economic decentralization. But the reason why I mentioned all of this is because I really liked the PDF again, and it talks about like what is the scale of decentralization, and I think people can make their own judgment call on what they think is like the best, right? And you can kind of like use the software services that you care about. Um, the Web3 part of read, write, and own that am I'm curious to see what'll happen is like the own part. Like
Hmm.
I personally care about what happens to my data, and I would like it to be stored somewhere, and I give permission to applicate, companies that run apps or application layers to access that data. But I can't imagine that my parents or anyone that isn't in tech really cares about like I'm on Instagram and I'm on TikTok. Like I've never heard any one
Right.
person or any of my friends on TikTok being like, I'm scared that the CCP is using my data for something, like it's tracking me.
Right.
Never like
Yeah.
this is like, I mean, we talk about it in Web3, and people in tech and the media talks about it. I don't know anyone who actually cares. I don't know anyone who cares that Instagram is using the way that Instagram is tracking them across websites. In fact, all I hear is how great Instagram is at knowing what product I want. Like
Yeah.
sometimes
Yeah.
I feel
Yeah.
like, oh, that's scary. Like I said it and it happened, or they're listening to me. You don't know, but
Right. No,
so
yeah. No, I was gonna say
um,
there's definitely like there's some, I don't know if it's niche or smaller groups that are like, maybe they're like very, libertarian, or they're very like independent rights, and they have like a strong feeling, even like the early like crypto punks movement that like kind of birthed the Bitcoin thing. Like there's some amount of group, but you're like the broad population, they really don't understand the issue that much, and they also don't care until maybe things go sideways. I mean, there were some interesting issues during COVID around like what you can say and can't say. What do you get the platform for? Which aspect kind of it speaks to kind of a control issue of the data. Like, do you actually control your own data or not in some sense? But I agree. Like for the most majority of people, like they want to use great services that are free, and they just don't want to feel like they're being taken advantage of.
Yeah, I 100% agree. What were your thoughts on the especially the PDF and the decentralization, like the breakdowns of the technical, economic, and legal decentralization?
It's so important because it's so hard to get access to that information. And, I think one of the things, the comments you were just making was, oh, if I had spare time, I could go through all these projects and I could write this down for, Solana, Bitcoin, Ethereum, Avalanche, whatever, And that would actually be, I think, extremely valuable because in my opinion, if you go back, 5, 10 years in crypto, a lot of the projects that have been able to maintain themselves better have been more decentralized, at least like the biggest market cap with Bitcoin and Ethereum. Like the market pays a premium for decentralization because it means inherently trust. So if you could have like a listing of all this information in a ranking, like a decentralization score for each of these major networks, that could be a long-term investment signal that over time these are going to survive a bit better. Maybe not during like a bull market because in a bull market everybody gets funded for exciting
Right.
ideas. But yeah, I mean that would be a lovely data set for people to put together.
Yeah, I wish I had the time. I really hope someone reads this and goes out and say like, hey, I'm going to build a decentralization score, on these things, because it's something I would, definitely make decisions off of. So, I completely agree with you on that. Yeah. I think the other thing that was interesting in this article, and we've talked about a lot of this in Web3 in general, is like composable building blocks, right?
Yes.
Um, it's like I think the concept is pretty simple, but in practice, I'm interested to see how if I have, let's take a simple example of like I have like my social media on, one protocol, right? How do I as a user allow other companies to access that information, knowing that like they're not going to use it in like in a, let's just say bad for lack of, not to be specific, but in a bad way,
Hmm.
and in ways that like I want them to use it, but also like lets me have a great user experience. Um, I haven't really seen something super advanced. Now, of course, there's so many projects in the Web3 space, like it just could have flown over my head, like you can't keep track of everything. But is there anything super cool you've seen in like, oh, like you have a bunch of composable building blocks and you can layer at least from a user experience side, maybe not from a technical side, but from a user experience side, you can layer these things on top and then you have like this great user experience to do something.
No, I mean the two closest that come to mind, there are definitely people that are trying to build what you described. I think there's a lot of opportunity there, especially from a non-technical user experience perspective. Their order routing, like Zapier Finance, is one I think where basically you can create a decentralized swap between different protocols, and it will automatically route it between different protocols, and it's all visual. You don't have to do a lot of coding. That's nice. The other one is Algo Vera is trying to do this for machine learning workflows. So effectively, you would drag and drop your workflow of, hey, I want an AI to come up with some story, maybe about, these characters and this thing happens and go write, 10 pages of a story. Then I want to feed that into a visualization and I want it to use stable diffusion to generate some images and artwork for the thing. They are thinking about it in that kind of a pipeline perspective where you can pipeline these different things together and use visually, which I think is very smart and could open up a lot of access to use cases. But you're right, like to reach more people, the low code, no code thing is critical, I think.
Mhm. Yeah, and I'm just thinking about like, like if I always think from like a product or user experience perspective because I think a lot of these things like um they just have to have like a great user experience and people
Yeah.
have to like care about it, right? Like people have to care that they're, you know, that you're using this, that some app is using this protocol because your data is safe, right? And if people don't care, then it's really hard to be like, you know, oh, this protocol or this decentralization technology is going to take off. I do think at some point we'll get into a situation where Web3 will end up like Linux, where like I don't know if you remember, but in like the mid 2000s, like PC Mag and PC World and CNET would be like, this is the year of Linux. Every single year, this is the
Yes.
year of Linux, and it never
Yes.
took off on desktop, or Mac. But everything in the world is powered by Linux. Android is powered by Linux. Our servers are powered by Linux. IoT devices are powered by Linux. Everything is powered by Linux. If you think about it, like Linux has been way more successful than people actually thought it was gonna be. right? Like
You're
people
right.
always imagine it to be like this free open source operating system for desktop. And there are obviously examples of that, but like I think the biggest power of Linux has been like it powers everything in the world that we do. And so
Yeah.
I could imagine like blockchain and crypto like moving into the background and powering all these financial tools and all these social media tools and etc. But we don't talk about it on a daily basis. It's something a decade from now just happened, you know? And
You're
I
right.
personally think that would probably be very good. You know, and you still have your crypto trading markets, but the tokenization of assets and, you know, um, making more liquidity pools or just having more liquid assets, etc. All of these things would be really good. Um, and like things would get at least technically and economically decentralized. I'm not sure how far you can go with legal decentralization before there's no way to like, you know, undo changes, or put someone in jail or find someone. But but yeah, I think that's the way. My personal opinion, and you know, take it for what it's worth, is that
Mhm.
you'd probably end up going in that direction, more than like, you know,
Yeah.
people talking about like hundreds or thousands of cryptocurrencies all the time.
No, I love that way of that framing of thinking about the issue because there's so many that unlocks so many things and it solves problems. There's a lot of discussion in the Web3 space about how do we make the user experience better? How do we make wallets easier for people to use? But what if it never gets easier? Just like the Linux command line never really got easier to use unless you wanted to get, you know, under the technical weeds. But like if it's powering back-end systems, what other back-end systems could you improve with crypto Web3 systems so that the users still get the nice, easy current Web2 front end, but you get all the nice economic and flexibility benefits of Web3?
Yeah, for sure. I'm interesting to see it'll play out. I remember, you know, I don't know if this was like a media thing or whatever, when people used to talk about like Web 2.0, you know, when like Facebook was becoming a thing and Twitter was becoming a thing, and then no, like after a few years, no one ever used the phrase Web 2.0 again. It was just the internet, the open web, you know, whatever.
Yeah.
Uh, so I'm
Yeah,
sure,
that's
like,
true.
you know, it'll be the same thing, like, you know, in a decade, you know, it'll just be the internet or the open web. Yeah, this is great. This is a lot of fun. Hopefully, people who are listening or watching got some value and entertainment out of this.
I totally agree. Alrighty, Sean, I'm gonna cut it off. Thanks, man.
Sounds
Talk to you
good.
next week.